of the questions I wanted to ask you is what's one underrated skill or trait that more people in sales or in leadership should master?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and there's probably a list of 10. So I'm just going to pick the one that really jumps out at me, and it's really kind of two. It's empathy and trust, and I'll start with the empathy side of it. I think that too often we are focused on our goals, and we have a hard time spending a minute in somebody else's shoes to understand what would motivate them. Like I know for me, motivating me is growing this business, but for them, what's motivating them is likely to be at least a little bit different and maybe radically different. And I think that we see this a lot in the data. With the surveys that we do, we see a lot of leadership that are Gen X and some baby boomer and some Gen Y, and we see a lot of the teams that they're leading being a generation, sometimes two generations younger than them, and trying to motivate a very different workforce from yourself using the things that motivate you is a recipe for disaster and for mediocrity. And so I think that you have to, and that's where that empathy piece comes in, right? To try to start from a place of understanding and then trying to build out a way that you can reach those individuals and find that shared space, because there oftentimes is shared space. It just doesn't always show up in the obvious ways. And then the second piece of this is I'm amazed throughout my career, and I'd be curious if you had this experience too, but you will outperform 75% of the people if you just do what you say you're going to do. Just be accountable and follow through on the things that you say that you're going to do, and you are already in the top, third, maybe top quarter of individuals in the workforce in my experience. And so, really like make sure that what you're doing, you would do if there was a room full of people, just in the same way that you do if it was by yourself. And I think that that's ultimately where become trustworthy and you earn the trust of others. And that's to me a really important piece. Like if you have a customer that would be better served going a different way, then tell them that. And you'll make yourself so much more credible when you're trying to convince them that they really should use you. If you've already told them two times when they'd be better off going a different route.
I couldn't agree more, Eric. One of the things that I find interesting is that how you can actually gain such respect and become a trusted advisor for an organization, right? That works so well when you can instill that trust. I would also add patience.
When we go to the empathy side of it too, like, you know, really understanding how people want to be sold to on the sales side of things. I think we get so caught up in the formulaic way that we want to sell, and the different ecosystems of sales strategies that exist. And there's a lot to be learned from a lot of those. That being said, none of them will work if you're not in touch with what your customer actually needs, how your customer wants to buy. And I think that that's the really good salespeople can understand that, okay, when I'm talking to Anna, I'm going to talk about this a little bit differently than when I'm talking to Eric, because how they want to buy, the process that they want to go through is very, very different. And being able to tailor to that and adjust that on the fly, to me, is the sign of somebody that really understands their buyer.
Exactly. And you know what? And that's a lot of times as I'm working with new salespeople or new to the profession, patience is one of those skills that they just don't have because they're anxious to kind of get a book of business. But then trust and empathy is even harder to teach, especially with salespeople. As a leader, I mean, I would almost think that that's got to be like mandatory. Like you have to have these skills to be a successful leader or to be able to lead a company.
You would think so. You would think so, but I have seen so many leaders, and honestly, we've hired leaders at times that have not had that in the way that you would expect them to, and it just becomes a blind spot, just in the way that if I can't really handle the analytics of the different strategic options, that's a blind spot or a weakness. That empathy piece is really hard to overcome. I've seen people do it. They'll surround themselves with the leaders directly below them that are exceptional at that and can kind of buffer on that. But the reality is that it is a skill that is hard to overcome if you don't have some core level of empathy.
Exactly, and if you think about it, the way a culture is built within a company is from the leadership, is senior leadership, and so if they're not empathetic and they're just looking at their next level of management to be able, to handle that for them, it's gonna come through, and
Yeah.
it's gonna affect the overall culture of the organization, which will affect the revenue growth of a
Yeah.
company. There's definitely proven stats out there that show if you have a poor culture, it's going to affect your overall revenue growth.
Yeah. And yeah, you have higher turnover, and the people that don't leave that are just unhappy probably do even more damage than those that leave. But in the staffing space, when we think about this, like we have tremendous turnover of our account managers and our recruiters, and they're oftentimes leaving a team that they don't resonate with. It's not, that adage that people don't quit jobs, they quit managers. In staffing, they quit teams. The manager is certainly a huge part of that team, but not the only part of that team. And so we have to look for opportunities to really drive, the engagement throughout the entire team.